Greetings, urban farmers, gardeners, and healthy food visionaries. Greg Peterson here, and welcome to the 264th episode of the Urban Farm Podcast, where 3 days a week we work together educating and inspiring you to become part of your food revolution. Nature doesn't waste energy, and by using natural cycles to work in our favor, we can harvest both plants and fish. Let us teach you how. Just text Grow Fish to 33444 or visit iwanttogrowfish.com and you will receive our free webinar on how to grow your own fish-powered garden. Today on our podcast, we're talking to Anne Biklé about microbial roots of life and health. Anne is a biologist and avid gardener whose wide-ranging interests have led her into watershed restoration, environmental planning, and public health. She uses her broad background and endless fascination with the natural world to investigate and write about people and their environments. Anne is also a rampant plant whisperer, coaxing plants into rambunctious growth or nursing them back from the edge of death. She uses her garden, a nearby traffic circle, and a sidewalk planting strip as places to watch plants, people, and their interactions. She co-wrote The Hidden Half of Nature, The Microbial Roots of Life and Health, with her husband David Montgomery, who was our guest on episode 259. Welcome to the show today, Anne.
Great. Glad to be here, Greg.
Thank you. So I shared a bit about you. Can you fill in the blanks for us and share more about the path you took to get where you're at today?
Sure. I'd say that in some ways, like most of us, there's always sort of something about your childhood that sort of sticks with you throughout life.
Yep.
And for me, I, as a little kid, was always way preferred being outdoors to indoors. Mm-hmm. And we didn't grow up out in the country or on a huge amount of acreage or anything like that. It was a pretty average suburban neighborhood in the Denver area, in Littleton, actually. Uh-huh. There was a series of small sort of rock garden type things that my parents had developed and planted shortly after the house was built. And I have one of my most vivid memories was as a little girl and kind of wandering around. And I was probably 4 years old or so, not even in school. And it was early June, and I came across this flower that towered over my head, and I desperately wanted to get my nose into it. And that flower happened to be a super fragrant purple iris.
Oh, wow.
And I remember sticking almost my whole face into that flower and thinking, oh my God, what is this thing? I love this thing. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's my earliest memory of sort of falling in love with plants. Uh-huh. And as, time went on, neither of my parents were big-time gardeners. I didn't have any sort of, delphinium doting kind of an aunt that would, take me out to some grand estate or anything. I just liked plants and I liked gardens. And it wasn't until many, many years later, sometime in my 30s, that my husband and I, by this time we had moved to Seattle, where we still live, that we bought a house. And my one thing that I really, really, really wanted when we were able to buy a place was space for a garden.
Of course.
Because I had dipped into gardening throughout being in college and graduate school and everything, but I was always renting and always moving, like every 6 or 9 months. I never really literally could put roots down.
Right.
So when we got our place here, we decided to do something kind of radical, and that was that our lot is situated such that the house is all the way over on one side of the lot, and that leaves us with a very large side yard on the other side. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there was a few scattered plants on our place. We talk about this in the book, The Hidden Half of Nature, that we wrote. It was Norwegians who built this house, and Norwegians, at least in Seattle at that time when they built the house, they were not really gardeners. And anything that blew in on the wind and the rain took root, it grew, and nothing was in the right place, and they were not appealing plants in any sort of sense of the word. So we demolished, actually, everything on the lot except the house.
Oh,
So
wow.
all that,
Uh-huh.
yeah, pulled the ratty lawn off, the mulberry tree that had been topped no less than 49 times,
Mm-hmm.
a holly tree that was about to eat us up, all of these things. And so this was my path to really becoming a gardener and cutting my teeth on gardening and figuring out things about plants and the soil. And it eventually culminated in the book that I just mentioned, The Hidden Half of Nature, The Microbial Roots of Life and Health. And that book is a mix of this story about our garden with history and science that tells basically the story of our tangled relationship with the microbial world, both in the soil and in our own bodies. And that I would say is sort of where I'm at now in my life. The book has been out just a little over 2 years, and it still continues to amaze me how little we know about fundamentally vital and important parts of our body, as well as the plant's green body and the soil.
Yeah.
So that's how I got here.
Wow. So you mentioned these microbes, and what I want to know for our listeners is, why are they so important?
Yeah. These are the smallest creatures on Earth. We cannot see them. They are invisible. And so it makes it very hard to cuddle up to them and to sort of grok them, if you remember that verb from
yes.
the science fiction novel of Heinlein. Grok is to fully understand and grasp something.
Yeah.
And we just do not get that with the microbial world. And what they do is they sort of specialize. Microbes, or bacteria in particular, are very interesting. They can live off of just about anything, off of carbohydrates, off of sulfur, off of weird metals. They can live in water that's boiling hot, deep down in the ocean floor. They can live up in the atmosphere. And they're very facile. They're very adaptable. And like every living thing on this planet, they need things to eat, and they're trying to reproduce. And so they have, through the course of Earth's history and evolution, they have hooked up with actually every living organism on this planet is hauling around a crew of microbes in and on their bodies, whether you're a starfish, a dog, a person, an amoeba, a redwood tree, whatever. We each have our microbial crew with us. And what's so astonishing is that for so long, we thought that our well-being and health, as well as that of every other living organism, depended on the absence of microbes rather than their presence. And I think that's remarkable because it's 2017, and we have made huge scientific breakthroughs in many, many areas, and yet the microbiome field is in some ways very much still in its infancy in terms of what we're learning about the importance and significance of these other life forms to our own well-being and that of our gardens and our farms and our soil.
So you used a word, and then I just want to kind of call it out. It's microbiome. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah. So the microbiome, it's actually pretty simple. It's the community of microorganisms, so that includes bacteria, viruses, these bacteria-like organisms called archaea. It includes yeast, fungi, single-celled organisms without a cell nucleus that live in communities. And these communities of microbes are microbiome. It lives on the surface of things, so it lives, for example, on our skin. It lives on the leaf of a plant, can live on the outside of a root. But members of our microbiome also live inside of us and inside of plants. So for the plant world, they're living inside of a plant's roots and stems and shoots. And they are living in us. And the highest density of the human microbiome, both in terms of numbers and diversity, is in the lowermost part of our digestive tract, in our colon. And the counterpart to that in the botanical world is the root system. And in fact, it's estimated that, we often think of places like the Amazon as being most diverse and dense with life. Mm-hmm. But it turns out, on a per unit basis, the root system of a plant, I would say growing in healthy soil,
right,
is where, in fact, we find most of the life on our planet is congregated around the roots of plants.
Curious, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
So,
and again, I'll say this isn't the roots of plants, growing in a soil that's been treated with a lot of toxins and chemicals. Right. This would be plants growing in a domesticated, cultivated setting, like in a farm or a garden, in settings where we're not using a lot of agrochemicals or toxins, right, or other products. And in native plant communities, you could go measure stuff that's going on in, say, a forest soil or a grassland soil.
Right.
And you would find high density diversity of life around the root systems, much more so than the above ground parts of a plant.
Got it. Well, and it makes perfect sense because there's so many more places for it to hide and be nurtured.
Right.
So does the rhizosphere have something to do with this arena as well?
Yes. So the rhizosphere is a halo-like area that surrounds the root system of a plant. And if you picture a root system, there's all of these major roots that we can easily see with our eyes. And as you go further out in the root system, eventually you'll get out to the teeny tiny root hairs, right? If you were to take a pencil, and if you were able to, in 3D, draw an outline around each and every root hair of a plant, all around the entire root system, that would be its rhizosphere. And the rhizosphere extends, anywhere from a couple of millimeters, maybe out to as much as a centimeter from a root or a root hair. And it is a very, very active area. In the book, in The Hidden Half of Nature, we call the rhizosphere a biological bazaar because there are a ton of products available in that bazaar. The plant is making some of these products. The root microbiome is making some of these products. And there are exchanges and trades going on ceaselessly,
right,
endlessly down there in the rhizosphere. It is busier than Times Square. It's busier than any of these, ancient bazaars that we often might picture, say, from the Middle East or something, where you have traders and bringing wares in from all over the place to trade with other people. The rhizosphere, all that stuff pales in comparison to what's going on in a well-functioning rhizosphere.
Wow. So there's these interactions going on between the plant roots and the microbes, is there not?
Yeah, yes.
So tell us about that.
Tons of interactions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how this all works, this is, and when I'm talking about this, people will go, oh, this is why we've been so wrong about what the microbial world is up to. So here's how it basically works. I mean, a plant's green body is absolutely amazing with all of the things that it can do because it's got all of this leafy stuff above ground, and it's got a monopoly on sunlight, and it can convert that sun's energy into endless carbohydrates, some of which it uses itself to build its green body, but there's estimates of up to around 40% of the carbohydrates produced through photosynthesis are turned into compounds called exudates. And these exudates are not directly for the plant. They shunt all these exudates down to their roots, and then they release these exudates out of their roots into the rhizosphere, into the soil surrounding all of these roots. Now, why would a plant be doing that? That's 40% of your body's energy producing things that you're just kind of leaking out of your root system. That's like any one of us going and sort of putting the part of our paycheck on the corner. Like, anyone can have this.
Yeah.
So plants are doing this. Plants are very wily and very strategic in their own way. And they are doing this, with these exudates, they are recruiting and retaining legions of microbes to come into that rhizosphere and to start, and where this is all going is it's developing a symbiotic relationship with all different kinds of microbes in the soil. So what are in these exudates? It's, sugary carbohydrates. It's proteins. It's various kind of nutrients that microbes are not getting in the soil, right? There's carbohydrates that find their way into the soil. Those are all made by the plant's green body. The fungus and bacteria and other things down there, they rely on that plant for carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a great energy source. It's a sugar. I mean, our bodies run on carbohydrates as well. And so a plant starts releasing these exudates, and the bacteria come running like dogs to a bone, or more like a dish of, soup or something, and they start slurping this stuff up, these exudates. And the bacteria, in turn, just like every organism, they are taking this in, and they have waste products. And I think we need a really different word for waste product, because they excrete metabolites after they're done consuming these carbohydrates. And some of these metabolites turn out to be things that are hugely beneficial to a plant.
Fertilizers.
Bacteria can make plant growth promoting hormones. So here's this plant that is relying on bacteria living around its roots to make growth hormones. So it becomes this cycle of the plant supplying things to its root microbiome. The root microbiome transforms them into, it's sort of like the goose that laid the golden egg in a way, but it's the bacteria laying the golden metabolites that plant can take back up. In another case, fungi. I'm sure your listeners on this podcast have heard of mycorrhizal fungi. So these are you're right.
Yeah.
So if you were able to see the amount of fungi again in a healthy soil that are swathing and coating a plant root, it would blow all of our minds. So here they are, one end firmly attached to the root, and in some cases inside of the root. The other end of that hyphae is off out in the soil somewhere, beyond the reach of the plant's roots, mining minerals out of soil particles and rocks. Minerals like iron and zinc and all of these trace minerals that plants need in small quantities, but they nevertheless must have them. So the fungi is out there doing its nutrient mining, and it transports all that stuff back to the plant root. And guess what the fungi likes to eat too? They live off of carbohydrates.
Right.
So it's this, nutritional highway that fungi have built with the botanical world.
So really, the carbohydrates are bait to get the microbes in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's to not only get them in, but keep them there.
Yeah.
Because just like any of us, if we show up to work and there's free food, we'll keep coming to work partly. Or if we knew it was like, okay, every third Monday donuts.
Right.
As that time rolls around, the expectation is, oh yeah, more free donuts. So as soon as you cut the donuts off, that third Monday isn't so fun anymore.
Right.
And likewise in the soil, the minute the microbes stop getting these exudates, they need to eat.
Right.
Right? So they're going to go off. Several things are going to happen. Their population is going to decline because they're being starved, or they're going to go off and try and find, food somewhere else. That's pretty much the two options when plant exudates drop off.
Yeah. So all this is pointing to creating a healthy soil so that the plants can thrive, so that the microbes can thrive. So can you kind of point us in the direction of what is healthy soil?
We all hear about human health, and you hear about soil health. And when you ask the question, what makes for a healthy person, one definition at least is, the absence of disease and infirmity, and then tagged on to that is also a body that is can thrive and does thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really no different for the botanical world. Soil health translates directly to the health of the plant itself. And the soil health itself, I mean, it's becoming somewhat of a buzzword, and it is so closely linked to plant health that the two are just inseparable. But soil health to me, and there's not firm definitions of this, because it's sort of a concept that people in agronomy and horticulture and anyone involved in plant science, I think, is still trying to get their arms around. But I will say, if there was a biomarker for soil health, the way that, say, we use blood pressure and temperature as somewhat like biomarkers for our health, it would be to have robust populations of beneficial microorganisms in the soil. And the way that you get there is by having also soils that are rich in carbon and carbohydrates. And so that means soil rich in organic matter. Because not only do these microbes eat sort of the ready-made carbohydrates that come out as exudates, we all know that the microbial world is also breaking down every dead part of a plant that makes its way into or on the soil.
Right.
So those are the two sort of main sources of carbon for the microbial world. So if you've got a lot of carbon, chances are you've got really nice, robust populations of microbes, most of which are beneficial to the plant body.
Right.
And so that's sort of the definition of soil health. And there's some practices that will affect carbon levels and exudate production in plants. And so that's a part of soil health as well.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that you use those practices to restore the life into the soil in your yard.
Yeah, because here was the big villain in our story. When we demolished everything on the lot to put the garden in, it ended up being, you just wonder, it's like, how do we get in this spot? Even though it rains a lot in Seattle, our summers are hot and dry. We ended up around the end of July, beginning of August, with all of these plants and getting them into the ground then.
Oh my
and
gosh.
Looking at this was a near disaster. Thinking back to that, we have pictures, and every time I see them, I still cringe. The soil was cracked open. It was so dry. It was the color of sort of like khaki pants mixed with beach sand, rocks. I mean, it was not great. And then on top of, you dig down anywhere from like 6, 8 to 10 inches, and then all of a sudden the shovel hits this thing that's like concrete, and it sends a zing up your arm because the shovel's kind of rebounded out of the soil, and that is glacial till. That is this truly, it's a geologic deposit in glaciated areas, and it's from the time when we had nearly a mile of ice sitting on top of Seattle, and you can imagine what that does. That's a huge, huge compactor. So that was our situation. And that was the villain sort of in our story, was, oh my God, this lousy soil. How stupid could me, a biologist, and my husband, Dave, who's a geologist, we didn't really even check our soil out. I mean, not to any degree that we should have. And there was not much in the way of soil life. I mean, digging around, normally you see something, moving around in the soil. We didn't see much. We saw nothing.
Yeah. we have something here in Phoenix in the low desert called caliche, which is
caliche. Yeah,
really similar. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So what did you do to fix it?
Yeah, well, you can relate to this then, being in the desert. It was paramount that as we planted these plants, that they get water, and most of all, I wanted that water to stay in the soil.
Yeah.
And I had gardened enough to know that, okay, well, something on top of the soil, mulch, compost, something on top of the soil is going to help retain the water. So the rest of that month of August, we had blown our budget on plants, and so there was no like buying massive quantities of compost or anything like that. I watered like crazy through August. I managed to scrape up some kinds of like free and cheap organic matter.
Right.
And in Seattle, one thing that we have a lot of is coffee grounds.
Oh.
And I also managed to make friends with local arborists. So these are, professional tree pruners, and
For
a lot
the
of trees in
Woodchips?
Seattle. So yeah,
For
so
the
got a
wood
lot
chips.
of wood
Yeah.
chips. And I began mixing. So wood chips are a carbon source. The coffee grounds are a nitrogen source.
Yep.
And you want those two things mixed together in any kind of compost or mulch. I didn't do a whole lot of, scientific testing on this stuff. I had no time for that. And
Right.
besides, I thought, this is good enough. This is what I have right now. This is what I'm doing. So I made up a mulch of coffee grounds and wood chips and put it everywhere, around all of the plants. And then as I accumulated more organic matter, wood chips, coffee grounds, eventually that fall I got leaves off of neighbors' trees.
Oh, right, of course.
Mixed that in, and I started to fill in the places in between the plants with mulch. And over the years, I have just continued to do that. I have various kinds of mulch mixes. In fact, a neighbor and I have been absolutely giddy for the last month because we got the finest quality of free chips from arborists that we have ever had in all of these years that we've been doing this. It's a nice texture. It's not too small. It's not too big. There's not other undesirable things in their tree wood chips. And we got 10 yards, and it was free.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, completely free. So we've been just having just a ball with, he's mulching his garden and I'm mulching mine and mixing it up with all my other organic matter that I have laying around. And I just layer this on top of the beds around all the plants. Now, when we first put the garden in, it was really, I was layering a lot of this stuff, Greg. I was going probably 4 to 6 inches in height. And
at least.
I'll save, at least, yeah. And I'll save, listeners, keep that 4 to 6 inches of mulch in mind because I'm going to come back to that later when Greg asks me a question about something that I failed at.
Yeah.
Okay. But, organic matter in mulch brought our soil back to life.
Yeah.
It is now, we did some carbon testing on our soil about a year ago, and we had a sample from behind the garage where, I never did any mulching. There's nothing going on back there. The carbon content back there was around 1 or 2%. And then we measured 3 other areas in the garden. And beneath the lawn, and when I say lawn, a lot of people are like, down with lawns. Well, our lawn is just a green thing to walk on. It's all very low-growing plants. It's yarrow and clover and a ryegrass that does good here in the Northwest and some other herby forb type things. So our lawn was about 7 or 8% carbon right now. So this is after about 10, 15 years of continually adding various kinds of, I don't mulch the lawn, that would kill it, but I do compost type treatments on the lawn. In the beds where there's shrubs, trees, and perennials, the carbon content there is somewhat lower, interesting, around 5 or 6%. And highest of all is the veg bed, because we have a veg garden within our larger garden. And in the veg bed, the carbon content was around 12 or 13%. And that is in part because we have a short growing season here. And so when you put things in, it's like I'm very attuned to making sure that there's adequate organic matter in the veg garden. And so I've used my 2 favorite things for the veg garden in terms of organic matter are biochar and worm compost. I tell you, the finest compost on this planet is made by a worm's body.
Isn't that amazing?
In my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? I love that.
It is. Yeah. It is something. If I had more space, I would have more worms and more worm compost.
Yeah.
But
really,
alas,
really
I'm here in the middle of a city.
Really important. Yeah, we actually use an extreme amount of wood chips in our yards here in the desert. So your 4 to 6 inches, we suggest 6 to 10 inches. And I actually have a friend who is, most of our listeners know him, Jake Mace, and he's got 3 feet of wood chips in his backyard.
Wow.
Yeah, and he has turned his desert backyard into a literal jungle simply by putting wood chips in place.
Yeah.
So there is another resource for everybody out there. It's called getchipdrop.com. It's an app that connects arborists with gardeners to get free wood chips. So
yeah, I can highly recommend wood chips.
Yeah,
I love them.
Really, really important. And, especially if you're, long-terming a garden, you don't have to put gardens in right now. Wood chips is a great place to go to start the soil growth process. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I would totally agree. In fact, when we put our garden in, anyone who's had a garden, well, we're not quite sure about this area. What are we going to do?
Uh-huh.
Well, around here, if you leave any soil uncovered, some plant is going to colonize it.
Uh-huh.
That's just the way nature does things.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, we don't want that. That's what we just got rid of. I also procured large pieces of cardboard from like appliance stores,
right.
and I pulled the tape off. I pulled the staples. I never took boxes with paint on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would put that down in an area, and then I would pile wood chips on top of the cardboard.
Yeah, why'd you do that?
And then, pardon me?
Why did you do that?
I did that because along the side of the house, this is there's maybe only about a 3 or 4 foot strip along one side of the house because the other side is all garden.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the side of the house that is adjoins a neighbor's driveway. And I wasn't going to be spending time over on this 3 foot long strip along the side of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want weeds growing there.
Yep.
But there were at the time. And I'm like, I'm not going to spend my time weeding this stuff. I'm going to lay cardboard down.
Yep.
And then I'm going to and I actually put a lot of wood chips, probably to a depth of maybe 8 inches,
right.
10 inches over there.
Yep.
And then I let that sit for a year or two, and then I came back and I pushed wood chips aside just enough to get down to the cardboard, which was in some areas pretty well decayed, but not in all.
Right.
And I cut a little hole in the cardboard, took that out, and then I planted a plant in there.
Mm-hmm.
And left the cardboard down, and then I just pulled the mulch, up to the crown of the plant.
Yep.
and went on my way down that 3 foot long strip along the house and left it there. I like cardboard for weed suppression.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And because I hate this like landscape fabric cloth.
Oh yeah, don't use that in your yards, guys.
No, don't use that. It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible stuff. I think it interferes with water. Anything that you put out there in the soil and it doesn't decompose or biodegrade, there's something wrong with it.
Yeah.
If the microbes are not eating it, first of all, it's not feeding the microbes.
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, it also could indicate, something toxic that you don't even want anywhere near the garden.
Exactly.
So anything that's on the soil, it needs to be feeding microbes.
Right. Amen to that. So just a caveat, you don't want to use wood chips in your garden soil where you're growing vegetables. And quickly, why is that?
Well, I don't like wood chips on my veg bed because they take too long to break down
mm-hmm.
over the growing season of my vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
I also have heard, and I actually have not really followed up on this much, that, and I don't know if it's a myth or not, but wood chips require
lots of nitrogen.
Yes. Yeah, to break down because they are a lot of carbon.
Yep.
And so there's information out there that says that nitrogen is going to come from the soil and it's going to go into breaking down wood chips instead of into a plant's green body.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
I think that's something to keep in mind when you're growing annuals and you want maximum growth over a short amount of time. Around a tree, that's a whole different kind of habitat and situation. And fungi in particular are really, they're great decomposers of wood. So I like to have wood chips for my mycorrhizal fungi that are attached to my tree roots. I like them to have as varied a diet as possible.
Right. Yeah, and trees love that kind of soil.
Yeah.
So tell us about the hidden half of nature, the microbial roots of life and health. Just give us a 2-minute, this is what it's about and why we should read it.
So all that I've been talking about before, there are bits and pieces of the hidden half of nature there. And the hidden half of nature is taking a look at the microbiome of the soil, and it's taking a look at the microbiome of the human body and weaving these two stories together of what do each of these microbiomes do for their respective hosts, i.e. a plant or a person, and why the things that the microbiome does are just so foundational to our health. I described some things that the root microbiome does, delivering growth-promoting hormones. There's also a ton of chemical signaling that goes on where microbes will tee a plant up for the approach of a pathogen, say. Well, in our gut, we've got, here's a neat little factoid, we've got a bacterium called Bacteroides theta iota omicron, which is B theta for short. This little bacterium has a genome that codes for over 260 enzymes that are capable of breaking down complex carbohydrates in our colon. So complex carbohydrate is really any kind of whole plant food. It hasn't been refined and broken down. It gets down there in the colon. B theta gets a hold of it. Munch, chow, munch, crunch. Great. B theta then produces metabolites from those complex carbohydrates, one of which is called butyrate. Butyrate activates our immune system in a very positive way. There's a lot of ailments related to fouled up inflammatory responses in most Americans' bodies, most adult Americans. Just say it's at the root of many chronic diseases. B theta tees up our immune system to activate a kind of an immune cell that is an anti-inflammatory immune cell, and it keeps inflammation at an appropriate level in our body, but it also lets it ramp up when we need it, because you do need your immune system and you do need inflammation at certain times.
Right.
And so that we talked about the rhizosphere in the plant body. The equivalent, the rhizosphere in the plant body, is our colon and our microbiome. And in fact, if you were to turn our digestive tract kind of inside out, it would be a lot like the rhizosphere of a plant, because you have all of these exchanges going on at the mucosal surface of the gut. Yes, it's a biological bazaar in our very bodies. So this was just, so that's, the book is that. That's the science part of it. There's also a memoir part of it in that we tell this story through the things that happened that we saw in our garden, and then also through a very personal health challenge that I encountered in the book. It was about with cancer, and so that made me ask a lot of questions about the health of the human body and where does that health come from. And so that is the hidden half of nature is sort of those two intertwined stories, and we go into lots of fun things about Sir Albert Howard for listeners who may or may not know about them. There's good stuff about him. He's sort of considered the father of organic agriculture. There's lots of cool history about some of these early microbiologists, people like Louis Pasteur, the French guy, and also Robert Koch, the German. And so it's these dots that we lay out about how we first became aware of the microbial world, became aware of what it did, and how we're at this sort of new unfolding story because of what we're learning about microbiomes. And I will say this one thing, microbiomes are the greatest unknown conservation project on this planet. Because when you're talking about the kind of health effects that a fouled up microbiome delivers to a human being or to a plant's green body, we all of a sudden realize we truly are a part of nature, and she's a part of us. I mean, I think that, even for me, who, with my training in natural history and biology, I came to entirely new realizations about just how embedded nature is in our bodies. And to me, that was really exciting, and it's an exciting part of the book as well.
Wow. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. That is The Hidden Half of Nature, the Microbial Roots of Life and Health. So I'm going to shift on you, and I'd like for you to talk about a time you failed, how you overcame that failure, and what you might have learned from it.
Right. Okay. I love being able to talk about mulch multiple times in a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where my failure came in. So, the mulch maven. I'm on an organic matter crusade in the early years of the garden, and I just kept piling it up. And I piled it up so high around a couple of trees that I ended up killing the trees. Yeah. My beloved, I lost a hinoki cypress. It's a beautiful tree in the Northwest. I lost a hinoki cypress, and I think it probably also contributed to the demise of another tree called a forest pansy redbud, which it's a, listeners may be familiar with the redbud. This particular one had this gorgeous burgundy plum-colored leaves, could get almost as big as your face. It was a beautiful tree, and what happened is I was exceeding the capability of my microbial herds to digest and decompose all of the organic matter that I was adding. So it was sort of like putting food on the dinner table and then putting more food and more food, and then sooner or later your dinner guests are just, stuffed. They can't eat anymore, and soon everyone's drowning in food. Yeah. So I smothered the root system. I think I smothered the root systems of these trees. Now I knew enough. I'm not piling mulch up around, clear up beyond the root flare of the tree. It's pulled back from the trunk, but I had it too thick over the root system of the tree. That was my failure, and it was heartbreaking. And what did I learn from that? Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier that my neighbor and we just got, this great batch of wood chips about a month ago. Right. And so I am evaluating and analyzing as I put these wood chips out. Okay, well, how deep is the mulch right now around this tree? How much do I need? This tree, wow, it's really, for whatever reason, the mulch has gone really quickly around this tree. Okay, I'm going to pile it up. These other trees, unfortunately, are street trees. I didn't know exactly. There was some confusion during the street tree planting project, let's just say that, about the proper height at which a tree should be set.
There you
go. A few of them got set too low.
That'll do
it. That'll do it. And so I'm very conscious about putting too much mulch on these street trees because they're already set a bit too low. Yeah. And so that is what I learned, is to evaluate before I put more mulch down how much is here already, and don't overdo it.
And what do they need? Yeah.
Yeah. Don't overdo it if you've got, it's just like our body, right? We've all got our quirks and our weak spots. And so if it's like, I know, that thing always aggravates my elbow, I don't go and do that. I figure out another way. And so like I've got these street trees, they're set a little too low, so I'm really paying attention to the mulch level there. So that's what I learned. I learned in a heartbreaking way. I mean, a tree is a long-lived being, and it is hard to see one go. Yeah. By your own actions. Right. Ugh.
Yeah. Ugh. Well, and it's part of the learning process, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So what do you consider your biggest success?
I would say it started out kind of scary. Initially I mentioned that we had decided to demolish everything on our lot except the house. And that was so scary when we did that, and we saw the state of our soil, and I thought, we're never ever going to recover from this. And yet we got the plants in. And by that fall, once I had scrambled enough to to bring enough organic matter into the garden and start creating these mulches, I think I learned then that a plant's green body knows what to do if you just give it the things that it needs. Mm-hmm. So do the water, feed the microbes, and stand back.
Yeah. Don't
be getting in there doing crap that you don't need to do, okay? Uh-huh. And I think for long-lived plants, especially trees, I have been very successful at letting these trees do their thing. Mm-hmm. I've become a very good and careful pruner of our trees because I've seen so many botched, and here in the Northwest we have a lot of trees, and I would say 8 out of 10 trees, either a gardener or even an arborist, or some maybe perhaps calling themselves an arborist, has gotten in and botched something, and that then sets a tree on a trajectory for the rest of its life, which is decades of ill health or bad looks. And so I am very, very mindful of my pruning and what it is that I'm doing and why I'm pruning. And really, you should never, if you're pruning to control the growth of a tree, you probably never should have planted that tree. I prune to guide the growth of a tree. I don't prune to control the growth. That is folly. A tree will grow as big as it can based on the habitat that it's in. And like we had a bumper crop of rain this year, and everybody's trees have just exploded. Yeah. And it's like, I'm not cutting that. I'm not. This is what the tree's body does. Mm-hmm. This is what it's designed to do. So I've become very good at listening to my plants, in particular the ones that are longer lived, and that is just simply because over the years of watching them, they just like people, they all have their personalities, and I know what they want to do, and so I stand back and I let them do that. Yeah. And so that takes some patience and some the plant's eye view of the world. This plant knows what it's doing. Yeah, I'm getting out of the way.
Yeah. So what drives you?
Well, I think it's my basic curiosity about how and why the natural world works the way it does. There are so many interesting things about biology, about our bodies, about nature, about ecology, that it's just sort of ceaseless fodder for my mind. I want to know, like, well, especially when we did all this research on the microbiome, it was like, oh my God, I cannot, this is just overexciting to know what the microbial world does, and it's overwhelming sometimes to think about it. And I'm very happy now that science, and it's getting more and more out into the popular press as well, that microbiomes are just so critical to our well-being and the way that the planet functions. So I like to learn a lot of things, and I especially like to build on my base of knowledge about something I already know quite a bit about, and I like it also when my thinking is challenged, because like on this mulch thing, right? I just thought, oh, more is better, more is better. Well, wait a minute. More in my case was not better because I killed some trees. So it becomes a way of curiosity becomes a way to curate your gardening or farming practices into sort of, menus and formats for what to do, what not to do. Yeah. That's what drives me in the garden. And I have to say, I'm the kind of cook, too, who I'm never very good at just not asking questions or just following recipes, because I always want to know, well, why? Why are we putting this in this dish? Right. And so quite often I'll end up, mostly because I don't typically have like every single ingredient that some recipe calls for. So I'm like, well, we're going to be substituting this for that. And you know what? Most of the time, it turns out just fine.
Yeah.
And I will caveat that with, there's a reason I'm not like a baker, okay? Because you need,
right, exactly.
Baking is more like chemistry.
Yeah.
Soups and stews and other things like that, they're more like gardening. They're more like my mulch mixes. Yeah. And I have a saying, kind of a tagline that goes with the hidden half of nature, that will not be surprising to your listeners, and it is mulch your soil inside and out.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So if you could recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be and why?
Yeah. Well, a book that I was very influenced by, it must have been my second or third year in college, that I thought, oh, God, we're going to read that. How am I going to get through that book?
Right.
Well, that book was Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species. And that was an absolute page-turner. Because if you have not read that book, it's likely that what you have in mind that book is about is, oh, he's just going to talk about evolution. Well, that word is not used maybe but several times in the book. What Charles Darwin did was he wrote about things like pigeons and dogs and plants and his experiences aboard the HMS Beagle, this ship that went down to South America, and he and others go traipsing off the ship and are running around in the jungle, and so you're wondering why is he telling us all of these things that seem like they're so unrelated? Well, just stick with the book, because it is the biggest, grandest trail of breadcrumbs that you will ever read about. And it, as a biologist, it put so many things into context for me. So that for me was a very, very influential book, and I still think, as I'm doing things out in the garden, oh yeah, this is what's going on. This is what's going on here. This plant's out. Look, this is this plant. This is the wrong place for this plant. It's never gonna duke it out with that other one. Just pull it up now and take it out of its misery. So that book was very influential. I want to mention one other book that I read recently that I love, both for its writing and its information. The Origin of Species, I will say, it's got this, he was writing in the mid-1800s or so, and it's this flowery Victorian language. And if you're like a headline reader or a Twitter person, it's going to be different. And but I would advise you stick with it. You're reading it for the ideas and the story and the argument, not really for the literature.
Right.
This other book, on the other hand, I love the way he wrote it. It's called The Hidden Life of Trees. It's by a German forester. Have you heard of it?
I have not.
Yeah, The Hidden Life of Trees. It came out, this turned out to be like a big runaway hit in Germany, and then the David Suzuki Foundation, which is sort of he's an environmental dude, up in Vancouver. Anyway, they brought it to the U.S. and published it, and you will never think about a tree the same way again after you read this book. It's a short little book. It's just wonderful. I loved it. And there's one that I have not read that I'm very intrigued by, and it's new, and I liked it because when I went to this person's somewhere, maybe it was on Twitter, blog, whatever it was, she said, gardeners, first thing to do, lay down the weapons. I'm like, I love her. Who is this? She's a gardener out of the Southeast, and the title of that book is The Humane Gardener. You might check her out. Maybe she'd be good for your podcast. I don't know her, but I've kind of dipped into, we follow her on Twitter, and so I'm like, she's on this. She's all over it. Great.
I'm on it. Thanks. Thank you. So what one final piece of advice do you have for our listeners?
Well, I think as gardeners, we might often think urban farmers, gardeners, if only I had here in the Northwest, we pine for sun. If only I had more sun on my lawn. Maybe in Phoenix, if only I had more organic, rich soil.
Yep. And
my advice is to get that kind of thinking. That is a path to misery. Okay, that that is a path to thinking about deficiencies and what's not working. My advice is to do what you can with what you have at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is going to be the source of happiness, because you are going to find some level or some way of being successful with whatever your gardening endeavor is. And so, maybe all you have is a little window box. Fine. Throw some petunias or pansies in there and watch them grow and take care of them, and it will be rewarding. And I think back to when we put the garden in, and I'm like, crap, we have crap dirt, crap.
Dirt, yeah.
And oh God, how are we in this? And what about Mary's soil? I've seen her soil, and it's beautiful. And
Right.
That is a road to misery, people. Yep. Do not go there. We are all capable of doing a lot with the organic matter that we have at our disposal that's cheap and free, and feeding the microbes of our soil, whether it's window box, container, garden, or farm, and letting the plants sort out what they are going to do with what you can give them.
I love that piece of advice. Do with what you have, with what you got, or do with, right?
Do what you can
with what
you have.
Yeah, perfect.
At this moment.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Anne.
Yeah, it's been a blast.
So how can our listeners get a hold of you?
Yeah, we have really easy. If you do a Google search on Dig to Grow, and so that's the number 2, not the word, Dig to Grow, that'll take you to our website, dig2grow.com. We're on Twitter at Dig2Grow, and at Facebook we are Dig to Grow Books. So that's how people can reach us. And we love to hear from readers and gardeners. And I think Dave mentioned on his the whole topic of the podcast you did with him is the new book, Growing a Revolution, Bringing Our Soil Back to Life.
Yep.
So that's out. And like I said, we ended up sort of writing this trilogy. Growing a Revolution is the most recent one. Hidden Half of Nature is the middle one, and it all started back about 10 years ago with a book called Dirt. So anyone who's into soil, the trilogy is out there.
There you go. You can find show notes from today's podcast at urbanfarm.org/roots of life. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for joining us on the Urban Farm Podcast. Do you want to save money at the grocery store, eat more organic, whole foods, cultivate food security, and feel more connected to the earth? If so, then growing your own food is a no-brainer. You wouldn't believe how many people come to me claiming that they can't grow their own food. They think they don't have enough space, that they're too busy, or that they simply don't have what it takes. Perhaps you've fallen for one of these gardening myths. If you think you can't grow food, or if you think the only food that you have access to is what you buy in the grocery store, I have a life-changing webinar that you need to see. It's free and will help you unearth your inner gardener. I've helped thousands of people just like you learn to grow their own food, and I'm speaking from my own experience when I say that with the right knowledge in place, there is no such thing as a black thumb. With this webinar, you can begin making your garden dreams come true and start growing delicious, nutritious food for your family. Just text GARDEN to 44222 or go to iwanttogarden.com and you will receive our free webinar about the 7 key factors you need to know to grow your own food. Remember, that's GARDEN to 44222 or iwanttogarden.com.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Urban Farm Podcast. Remember to listen 3 days a week for tips, advice, and resources to help you on your journey with urban farming. You can find us on the web at urbanfarm.org or send us an email to podcast@urbanfarm.org. In the words of Vincent van Gogh, great things are done by a series of small things brought together. Be encouraged that with each lesson learned and skill developed, you are one step closer in the direction of your dreams.